Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. What an incredible week of news is something I may have said if I was recording a timely episode of this podcast. Unfortunately, if any news did hit this week, I will not be talking about it as I am flying across the country to play an upcoming video game. As such, if any news did hit, I will be sure to talk about it next week. With that in mind, I'm going to be the only voice that you are hearing this episode, but I am not alone, as I will be joined by you, the wonderful listeners of the All Things Nintendo podcast. I put out a call for questions, and I received a ton of topics that you want me to talk about, a ton of prompts that you submitted. So we are going to dive into as many of them as we can for this episode in the latest edition of the Inbox Q&A. So thank you so much for tuning in. As always, like this, it really does mean a lot to me that you continue to listen to this show day in and day out. And I'm honestly overwhelmed by the number of questions. I haven't counted, but there's probably well over 100 here that I have. So obviously not going to be able to answer all 100 plus questions that were submitted, but I'm going to get to as many of them as I can in this episode. So, as a reminder, the Discord and the Patreon are the best ways to get any questions or comments in. That gets you priority access for episodes such as this. So I am going to go ahead and start with the questions that came in through either the Patreon or the Discord that you can access through the Patreon. So after that, we'll get to any that got submitted to me on Blue Sky, Instagram, and that other place. So first up, Wham Bam Sam over on Discord said, if all console brands combine into one ultimate console manufacturer, who would you want to be the leading company? Would the gaming world be better off? Would PC still be seen as the best? Oh, man. So that's a tough one to start with. But, if all of them combined into one ultimate console manufacturer, if for some reason Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox got together and said, hey, we need to take down PC. Let's combine forces and show that console supremacy exists, not PC supremacy. I guess I would want Nintendo to lead it just because I think they have the best track record right now. Xbox has kind of been a little bit ascendant with that most recent developer direct they had was phenomenal. So like up until that, I was kind of starting to lose faith a little bit in Xbox. PlayStation has been in a bit of a precarious spot, if you ask me. You know, they've been they've long been the producer of the better exclusives out of Xbox and PlayStation. But then you look at the place that they're in, the pivot that they've made to live service games. I think that the PlayStation, if I was going to choose PlayStation to be the leader of this kind of joint initiative that Wham Bam Sam is positing here, I think I would probably want it to be like the PlayStation of the mid to late 2010s. Maybe just the 2010s in general. I think that that era for PlayStation was something truly special. I think starting in 2020, there was this shift, this noticeable shift, where after games like Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost of Tsushima, they kind of started going towards the live service side of things. And it has largely been to their detriment, in my opinion. I enjoy a live service game from time to time, but, PlayStation has always been known for their incredible single player games. And I think that they've gotten away from that a little bit, even though we've gotten amazing single player games like God of War Ragnarok. I mentioned Ghost of Tsushima. We have Ghost of Yotei coming up. Just a lot of great games that they've put out, but it doesn't feel like it has the same emphasis that it once did. We don't really know much about what they might have on the horizon. I'm assuming Horizon's another great franchise. I'm assuming we will learn more about what their 2025 entails in the coming weeks. I think that we'll probably get a state of play, just like we got that Xbox developer direct. Xbox has been kind of meandering ever since the Series X and S came out. I feel like the second half of the Xbox One was actually a very strong showing from Xbox. And it's been kind of tough sledding for Xbox during Series X and S. I actually had a lot of hope for Xbox coming into this generation because I thought that, hey, the same reason I had a lot of hope for Street Fighter 6. You had the team that righted the ship coming in and building something from the ground up. You know, Phil Spencer's team deserves a lot of credit with how they turned around the Xbox One after the disastrous launch that console had. And, you know, his team did a phenomenal job with kind of turning things around. And I thought, okay, well, now they have the Series X and S. They have a great foundation with which to work from what they did with the Xbox One. And even in talking to him, Phil was like, hey, like I'm extremely excited to be able to create something from the ground up with this team. And I think that it's been a little bit meandering. I think that the Xbox consoles this generation have been kind of like an afterthought, if I'm being honest. And I think the Xbox has a lot of really great things going for it. I think the technology is very strong. I think that the cloud gaming initiative is something they could lean into. Game Pass, we don't know like what that really does for the developers aside from exposure. We don't have great insight into the business dealings of that. But I think that it's an overall positive for the industry. It's certainly something that I subscribe to. And then, you know, I think that their willingness to put their first party games on other platforms. You know, there's these rumors that we're going to start seeing Halo Master Chief Collection on PlayStation 5 and potentially Switch 2. Phil Spencer was just on friend of the show, Danny Pena's Gamer Tag Radio podcast, and you know he said that they're looking into ways that they can bring more Xbox first party games over to Switch 2. So that is something that I'm a huge fan of. I think that companies should be more willing to put their games on multiple platforms, and Xbox is the leader of that. But man, like if I'm wanting a leader of that, and the problem there, if you put Nintendo, like all of them have their positives and negatives, right? Nintendo was my gut reaction, and maybe that's just because I'm recording a Nintendo podcast right now. But I honestly don't know if I would want a console that doesn't. I like the gimmicks and the novelties of a Nintendo console, but the power. If there's only going to be one console, I feel like there has to be some sort of powerhouse option as well. Um, so maybe I would actually choose Xbox because they're also the leaders in backward and forward compatibility. Like when you buy an Xbox game, you can be sure that it's going to work on future consoles. And I think that is going to be the standard going forward. But that was a question mark for Nintendo up until it was confirmed in that investor call from President Furukawa that they would in fact be backwards compatible. And then we got to double down of that on the reveal trailer. But Xbox is just assumed. And man, so I think that, and you know, Nintendo has a ton of money. Xbox has Microsoft money, and I think I would want Xbox to lead the hardware division, and I would want Nintendo to lead the software division. If that's a cop out answer, then you can just say have Xbox create the hardware, and then Nintendo can do their own thing on that hardware. But I don't know. I kind of like the contrast that Nintendo has with these other powerhouse consoles by bringing the novelties, by focusing more on the quality instead of the power. Um, but yeah, I mean, I love my PlayStation 5, I love my Xbox Series X, and I love my Nintendo Switch. So I don't mind having all of them, and I kind of like having all of these options. Would Gaming World be better off? I don't think so. I think that you would get something akin to what we've gotten with the Madden franchise and what you've gotten with other uh, monopolies, and if not monopolies, monopsonies, where it is the company kind of starts resting on its laurels. I don't think that would be a good thing for the industry. I think competition has proven time and time again to be a massive boost to any industry. And I would love to see that competition continue. And I think that even if like we got down to two, like a two-party system in the console wars here, like I think that would be a bad thing. I think PlayStation needs its Xbox and Xbox needs its PlayStation. They can be rivals while also acknowledging that a rising tide lifts all ships. And I think that that has been kind of the shift that we have seen away from like the attitude that we had in the 90s where Sega was trying to go for the jugular with Nintendo, and Nintendo was taking these monopolistic practices that were openly hostile towards competition. I think now it's you see people like Phil Spencer who openly embrace the perceived competition of Xbox through providing these like whether it be congratulatory messages that sometimes the fanboys get riled up about, or it could be the just putting their games on other systems. And I think that's ultimately a good thing. So I don't think the gaming world would be better off by having this lack of competition, even if the PC side of things is still there. And would PC still be seen as the best? That ultimately just depends on how the console turns out, right? Like if it's just a console that's as powerful as a top end gaming PC, which if you have Microsoft, Sony, and PlayStation all investing money into it, you could easily create something that is as good, if not better, than the top of the line gaming PC. Theoretically, anyway. But would they want to do that, and would they want to put out a console that would be as expensive as a top of the line gaming PC? Because they're not going to sell for too big of a loss if they're going to sell for a loss at all. So I think that what you would have to look at is, the capabilities would be there to have competition with as good of a gaming PC that you could possibly build. But would these companies want to do that? Would they see the necessity to compete with that high end market, or would they want to keep it cost effective? I think that I think their way forward, if the end goal was for some reason to compete with PC gaming with this console, they would need to stop supporting PC gaming with their exclusive titles. Nintendo doesn't do that, but that Sony has started doing it more and more, and Xbox has been doing it for years now, where they're putting their big first party games on PC, whether day and date like Xbox or with the delay the way PlayStation does. If they did that, if they pulled all of their exclusive games, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which just recently came to PC, was going to be a console exclusive forever, and the next Forza Horizon game was never going to be on PC the way it is now. Gears, was it Emergence Day, I think is the name of the next Gears game. That's not going to be on Windows 10 or 11 or whatever. It's just going to be on Xbox or whatever the console ends up being called. That is the way that PC would not be seen as the best. But if it's the way it is right now, where the Spider-Man games of the world and the Halo games of the world are all coming to PC either day and date or eventually, I think that it would be tough for this console to overtake the PC market. They would need to pull back all of these exclusives that they've gotten into the habit of putting on PC. And I'm for having games on as many platforms as possible, but if you're talking purely a competitive spirit, that is the way that they would compete with PC as a platform. So thank you so much for that very intricate topic, Wham Bam Sam. Going over to Double Barrel on Discord, they ask a very straightforward question. What's your favorite console of all time? Oh boy. My favorite console of all time. My knee-jerk reaction was the Super Nintendo, which was my first console I ever owned. But the more I think about it, it might actually be the Nintendo Switch. I was kind of feeling down on Nintendo after the tail end of the Wii era and the entirety of the Wii U era. Even though I'm a big fan of the Wii U, I think that they missed the mark so spectacularly on so many individual components of the Wii U. I was kind of worried about what the Switch would end up being. And it was a terrific return to form for Nintendo, and it gave us so many of the best versions of so many of Nintendo's franchises. And it reestablished Nintendo as a leviathan in the games industry, something that can go blow for blow with the PlayStations and the Xboxes of the world, even if it doesn't have the firepower that those consoles have. And it has all of the virtual console stuff. The emulation is shoddy here or there, but ultimately it has so many of my favorite games of all time on one system. It's portable, which is wild that I can bring a game like Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom on a plane and play it with really no sacrifices at all, aside from a smaller screen than if I was playing it up on a TV. And yeah, it's just such a versatile system, and it has solidified Nintendo once again as something that deserves to be mentioned alongside any company. And also the fact that it united the two sides of the Nintendo coin, the handheld and the console sides. It was always a split effort ever since the Game Boy came out, where it was like, okay, well, Nintendo only has so many studios and so many development partners, and they have bandwidth that's like, okay, well, the Wii U is flopping, so we're only going to develop for the 3DS. Now all of those efforts are kind of focused on one platform, which makes it so that they are able to deliver just a nonstop output, which has been seen and you've reaped the benefits of on the Switch. And I mean, I thought about maybe the SNES or the N64, even the PlayStation 2. I had a soft spot for the Dreamcast, even though that wouldn't have been an answer in my probably even my top three. The Xbox 360 was fantastic, but I think I'm ultimately going to go with the Switch, which is probably the reason that the Switch 2 is so exciting for me. Let's go down to Megan S over on the Patreon page. She says, "What have been your timeless go-to Nintendo games over the years that you play when you are bored and want to relax?" Well, Super Mario World is a pretty easy answer for me there. Donkey Kong Country, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, more recently Breath of the Wild, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. I'm trying to think of other ones. WarioWare Smooth Moves was a. I mean, I don't really do it anymore because it's a Wii exclusive and it hasn't been ported over to the Switch, so I don't really dig that out. What else? What else? Really, any Mario Kart game. Um, Nintendo games. Link to the Past. I wish I could play Link Between Worlds, but it's stuck on the 3DS because that was a really great one. Oh, Pokemon Red and Blue. Those games I could play forever, or any real like iteration of them, whether it's Pokemon Red Blue, Pokemon Fire Red Leaf Green. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee to a slightly lesser extent, aside from how accessible it is thanks to it being on the Switch. To that end, also Pokemon Gold, Silver, Heart Gold, Soul Silver. Um, Games that are on Nintendo consoles. I mean, I can play any of the Sonic games at any of the, especially the 2D, any Sonic game. I'd say Sonic Adventure 2 or earlier, and then Sonic Unleashed or later. I could play um, just at any given time, pretty much. But especially like Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Now that that's on Nintendo consoles. Final Fantasy X is on Switch, so you could put that up there. But if you're just talking Nintendo games, I think I've named the comfort food games already. And then, okay, this is her follow up. I heard you mention Super Mario Brothers 3 amongst your top games of all time. I couldn't agree more. What is your favorite world in that game out of the 8? Mine is the third. I remember playing the first few levels of that world as a kid, and it made me realize just how much I love that game. Or I loved games. That's awesome. Yeah, Mario 3 was one of the games that I played as a kid where I'm just going to look up what the worlds are so I have them correct. Uh, Mario 3 was one of those kind of seminal games in getting me interested in video games as well, Megan. So I'm right there with you. Let's just so I have the worlds here. Oh boy, typing world and Control F on the Mario 3 wiki did not yield the results. There we go. There's world is mentioned 317 times on the Super Mario Brothers 3 wiki. Okay, so Grassland is World 1, Desert Land is World 2, Waterland. Oh yeah, Waterland's the one Megan mentioned here. That's a really good one. Giant Land, I think, was the one that probably blew my mind the most. Um, just having the enemies show up as giants in that was so impactful for me. I mean, that was it seems trivial now in 2025, but like back in 1991 or 1990 when this came to the US, it was mind-blowing to see like the Koopa Troopas show up and they're like what 4 or 5 times as big as they are normally. And I think that is one of the ones that's probably one of my favorite worlds is World 4, which is Giant Land. Um, Desert Land was like the first time I was really stressed playing a video game because of the sun that attacks you. But it might just be like my favorite. I mean, this is a basic answer, but like Grassland, the first world, just because there are so many iconic moments and levels, and like it was so impactful to start that first level and just be like, oh wow, like this is so much. This is such an advancement from Mario 1 and Mario 2, and I could probably play a lot of those levels in my sleep at this point because I've replayed the start of this game so many times. Um, so that's probably the most iconic one for me. But I'm going to go Grassland as my favorite. But yeah, Waterland, despite the fact that I'm never really a huge fan of water levels, that's a good land too. What is your favorite Pokemon type? Is her final question, and at first I would have said either fire or ghost because I love them in Gen 1, but I have fully embraced the dragon side of things. Dragonite has become my favorite Pokemon of all time. And let me close out this wiki because it is flashing ads all over me and it's distracting. Dragonite's become my favorite Pokemon. I was always a big fan of Gyarados, even though I don't think he's technically a dragon type. He's basically a water dragon. Um, yeah, I mean, I really do enjoy dragons. Like, if I was a gym leader, I think I would probably be closer to like something that like Lance brings. And I love Charizard as well, which Charizard is not a dragon type either. Is Gyarados? I feel like he is water and flying, but I could, yeah, he's water flying, and Charizard is fire and flying, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that dragon type is my favorite, and Dragonite is my favorite Pokemon. Avery Moore over on Patreon. What is your favorite Pokemon generation? Also, what is something you hope for on the Switch 2, whether it's a feature, piece of software, an accessory, etc.? All right, favorite Pokemon generation. If we're talking about the Pokemon that are in that generation, I'm going to go Gen 1. It's just the classic lineup. That classic 151 is, I don't think it's ever going to be beaten for me. There's been great generations since. I think Gen 2 and Gen 4 are also very solid. I also really like, I think it's Gen 6. Um, but yeah, Gen 1 is going to be my favorite in terms of the Pokemon in there. In terms of the games themselves, I will probably go Gen 2 with that. Gold and Silver, I think, are objectively the best games. And then the post game of Gen 2 is just unbeatable. And I don't know how the Pokemon franchise, I think that's going to be the pinnacle of the Pokemon franchise, probably for the rest of its existence, unless Game Freak really does something special with the upcoming games. Uh, and then also, what is something you hope for on the Switch 2? We already saw the mouse functionality, so I would love to see Mario Paint come up on the Switch 2, but gosh, I forget who it was, but I was doing a podcast last week, and one of the people on the show mentioned doing or a Mario Maker with the mouse capabilities, and that just blew my mind. I still hold to this day that the Mario Maker franchise is one of the most underrated concepts that Nintendo has ever done, and it would be fantastic to have them expand the functionality of it using the mouse functionality that the Switch 2 apparently has. Um, a piece of software. I mean, Ocarina of Time remake. I'm just gonna go with the low hanging fruit. Give me an Ocarina of Time modern remake. It's time. And an accessory. Oh boy. I wouldn't hate a new Ring Fit Adventure with improved functionality, but I'm not a big accessory guy. Like maybe just like we've seen in those Genki leaks that happened like a couple weeks prior to the Switch 2 reveal. We saw a way to swap out like the handles of the Joy Cons. I would love something like that to be first party because the quality that Nintendo puts out is typically very good. So I would love that. All right. ChainWhippin over on Patreon. Why did people expect Nintendo to innovate this generation when they historically iterate first? NES to SNES, 64 to GameCube, Wii to Wii U, Game Boy to Game Boy Advance, DS to 3DS. There's always a refining before redefining. Just a thought. Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that it was. I mean, I think that people just got used to it, right? Like, if you think about a lot of the gamers in this day and age, I would say most of them started with the GameCube. I mean, I think that's kind of the sweet spot where a lot of people started. And then if you look at the trajectory from there, it was all redefining, right? The GameCube to the Wii was a huge technological difference there with the motion controls. And then from the Wii to the Wii U was actually redefining because they swapped. I mean, yeah, the Wii remote still worked and you could still do motion controls for a lot of games, but the gamepad was the main attraction there. And then the Wii U to the Switch made it seem like they were redefining again, even though it was just kind of, you know, more or less canonizing what they were attempting to do with the Wii U and what people thought they were doing with the Wii U by making the thing fully portable and you having like a console powered system on the go. So really Nintendo in recent history has been redefining with every generation. So I understand why people expected more from it. But that said, it would have been stupid of Nintendo to redefine too much after the Switch has proven to be one of the most successful consoles to ever exist. You know, it's only trailing the PlayStation 2 and the DS at this point. And people have shown that there is a hunger for portable gaming, right? Like the Switch came out and people started chasing Nintendo. It wasn't the other way around. You know, Steam chases Nintendo with their Steam Deck, and then you have the ROG Ally, and then all the other various handheld gaming PCs. And Xbox has been saying that they're prototyping a handheld gaming device. So Nintendo needs to really show that they are the ones to chase, and they're the ones to keep chasing, and they need to reestablish themselves as an industry leader because they've started this trend, this craze of people wanting to take console quality and desktop PC quality games on the go. So yeah, it would have been stupid of them to iterate or redefine too much and innovate too much. I think that we already have a ton of innovations. I think people saying that, like, you know, Nintendo has lost its quirky nature are kind of, you know, losing, what is it the saying? Losing the trees for the forest, or losing the forest for the trees, because you look at what this controller already does. You can attach it to the sides to play games on the go. You can break it off to play games up on your TV. You can have a kickstand. You can turn it sideways to make it so that you can play two people on technically the same set of controllers. You can do motion controls. You can do HD rumble. There's all these things you can already do with the Joy-Cons. And then on top of that, you're also getting potentially mouse functionality. I don't think it's officially confirmed, but, like, you know, all these things that Nintendo is doing, and they're delivering a higher quality, in theory, version of this system that has done gangbusters for them. So I think that it would be unreasonable to expect too much deviation from that formula of success with this generation. I think next generation, maybe there will be a little bit of deviation, but, like, I think the Switch is going to be Nintendo's brand for the foreseeable future, the same way Game Boy was a brand, and Wii was a brand for Nintendo's systems for a very long time. And DS, you know, going from the DS to the 3DS and going from the Wii to the Wii U, I think we're going to have Switch in the nomenclature for quite a while now.
Every hero strikes out on their adventure for a different reason.
To prove myself worthy of my mother's praise.
To write my own story and discover who I really am.
To prove to my family that I am more than they believe me to be.
To revive the god that has chosen me.
But when the fragile balance of the world is in jeopardy, and sinister forces move in the darkness, heroes will be tested, pushed to their limits and beyond. And it will be left to them to determine if they are up to the task. There is a darkness rising. Will they be able to overcome the challenges and meet this evil head-on?
For my god.
For my story.
For my freedom.
For the world.
To restore the balance. Modified Role Season 2, The Chronicles of Erin, a D&D 5e actual play podcast. New season, new characters, new story. Find us on all the usual podcasting apps or at modifiedrole.com.
Brennan Roberts on Patreon. What will the next Mario spinoff be? Waluigi, New Sport, Toadette? I mean, we kind of did this with the pitching the next entry for the franchise. But I mean, if I had to give a realistic guess here, I would say Mario Paint. New Mario Paint would be a very strong guess if they're bringing in mouse functionality. I could see a Wario starring game. I think he's established himself enough as a character. I could see a new Yoshi game, especially with Yoshi becoming in theory, a big character in the next Mario movie. I could see them trying to capitalize on that. It could also very well be a Mario sports title. But yeah, I mean, I think that those are probably the most likely option. It would be cool to get like another Captain Toad game, to be honest. Like Captain Toad's Treasure Tracker, if you haven't played that, it is fantastic, and you should absolutely check that out. Zek, Three Sword Sama over on Patreon. Which Nintendo character should get the RPG treatment next? Mario has several RPGs, but it could be interesting to see another Nintendo IP in an RPG. I mean, the obvious answer for me is Zelda. Like that would be so cool to have like a full-fledged Zelda RPG, whether it be turn-based combat or something kind of like a modern Final Fantasy. Like full RPG stuff, like RPG elements similar to like what we get in like Elden Ring. But let's see. I think they could. I mean, this is going to sound a little goofy, but they could do some fun stuff with a Splatoon RPG. Given just the zaniness of that, RPGs traditionally have fantastic music, and guess what? Splatoon has incredible soundtrack, banger after banger on each soundtrack of each game. Metroid, maybe? Nah, I think Zelda. Yeah, Zelda's my answer. Marshall Thompson on Patreon. Your favorite Miyamoto story? Are these ones that like I've with my encounters with him, or would you mean like just overall? Let's see. Of the ones that I've had, I think that it's just his general presence, right? Like when you walk into the room and Shigeru Miyamoto is there, you immediately know it, even if even given that you're walking into that room because Shigeru Miyamoto is in there. But you know, he has an entourage of like, you know, when I interviewed Shigeru Miyamoto and Koji Kondo together, it was like I was doing it in front of a crowd because, you know, Shigeru Miyamoto has his entourage and handlers. Koji Kondo had his. Each of them had their own individual translators. The Japanese PR team was there. The US PR team was there. So I think there were probably like, you know, if memory serves, like 20 or 30 people in the room with us. And it's just it feels like an event when you're sitting down with them. In terms of like actual answers and like moments, I think it's just like Miyamoto's general demeanor is the way I always describe it to people is he's the exact person in, at least when you're talking to him in real life, that you would have wanted to create the Mario franchise and the Zelda franchise and the Star Fox franchise and all these amazing IP that Nintendo has. He's just a jolly, well-spoken, intelligent guy who has fun, and you could tell he still has love when he is talking about these things. But that said, you can tell he also has a business side. Like I asked him about like, you know, the Switch and its successes, and he's laying out like the reasons for it, and he knows exactly why the Switch has been so successful. And then I mentioned like, you know, all the other successes that Nintendo has had over the past decade, like, you know, the amusement park, the Mario movie, and then I got to Legos, and he lit up when I mentioned the Legos because it just seemed like he has such a love for fun innovations like that. I guess kind of a funny one is the first time I ever got to meet Shigeru Miyamoto, it was an interview that Ben Reeves, former Game Informer editor, was doing, and I was kind of just there in support. And I was like, oh, I really want to meet Shigeru Miyamoto. So they allowed me to tag along. And at the end, they were like, we have time for one more question. And Ben Reeves looks over at me. He goes, Brian, do you have any questions? And I was like, oh, well, put me on the spot. And at the time, I was working on some features about the Sonic franchise. And I was working on a piece about how Sonic ended up crossing over with Mario and Nintendo and coming over to the Nintendo platforms. So I had no idea if I was ever going to get to talk to Shigeru Miyamoto again. This was back in E3 2016, I believe, because I think it was for Breath of the Wild that we were talking to him about. It was for Breath of the Wild that we were talking to him. And I was working on this Sonic feature about, and I'd already gotten quotes from like Takashi Iizuka of Sonic Team and Tom Kalinske and all these various Sega luminaries. And I was like, man, I've got to ask Shigeru Miyamoto about Sonic the Hedgehog. So I had one chance to ask one question to Shigeru Miyamoto at that time. And I asked the creator of Mario and Zelda and all of these other franchises that I have grown up with, obsessed about. And I asked him a question about Sonic the Hedgehog, a game he had no part in playing, in creating, I mean. And, ultimately he gave me a good answer. And he knows how to answer questions, and he knows how to be just like the most endearing person in the room at all times. And also there was a moment, I think this was Ben Hansen, who was also at Game Informer at the time. He asked Shigeru Miyamoto if he could show him a video because, Shigeru Miyamoto was such a fan of Disney. Like, he was so inspired by Disney. And he says, hey, did you know that Disney actually referenced Mario? And Shigeru Miyamoto had no idea. So Ben Hansen brought up on his phone this like Mickey Mouse thing, because Miyamoto is such a huge fan of Mickey Mouse and Walt Disney's creations. And Ben showed Miyamoto this clip where it was like Mickey, like, and there was like Nintendo sound effects, and like it referenced Mario very briefly. But Miyamoto, you could tell he got such a kick out of that, because this thing that was so inspirational to him was referencing something that he had created. And he just got this giant smile on his face. And that was, that was something that was really cool to see. Unfortunately, it was not on camera because we'd already shut the cameras off at that point. Marshall had one more question. Who is the best aimer in Mario Kart, and why is it Toad? I used to joke back, because I've always been a Yoshi main in Mario Kart. I used to joke that, there's two types of people who play Yoshi in Mario Kart and people who lose. I don't think that's necessarily true. I just like to talk a little smack. But yeah, Yoshi's going to be my favorite, but I know a lot of people who play Toad and are fantastic. One of my very good friends is like the best Mario Kart player I've ever known, and he plays Toad. So I don't know about best aimer, because I think that comes down to the player more than the character. But Toad is a very good character. I've come to learn in my many years of playing Mario Kart. As I spill a little bit of water on myself. Zach Benkel over on Patreon. He's got a 4-pack of questions here. This is the last one from the Patreon side. Zach asks, do you think Switch 2 will be an 8 to 10 year console? My prediction is that it will last the rest of the PS5 Xbox Series generation and the next one. That way, Nintendo can get back to releasing new consoles around the same time as its competitors. I don't know if they're really concerned too much about releasing around the same time as their competitors, but if the Switch 2 is anywhere near as successful as the Switch 1, which I think it will be a slower start because it's not as novel and so many people already own a Switch 1, that I think that it's going to be difficult for the Switch 2 to have a fast start the way the Switch 1 did. That said, do I think it'll be an 8 to 10 year console? I don't think it'll be 8 to 10 years. I think if I had to predict, it'll be closer, I would say 6 to 8 would be the range that I would give for it. I think 8 is a very long console generation. And especially if a PlayStation 6 and an Xbox, whatever they end up calling the next system, ends up being like just absurdly more powerful, I think that we're going to get into the same situation that the Switch did in the second half of its lifespan, where all these third-party games that we're going to see an explosion of when the Switch 2 comes out, they're going to start being left behind once again, or like Marvel's Midnight Suns, where they'll announce there's going to be a Switch version, and then it's going to be like, oh, we're going to cancel that because there's just too much disparity between the platforms. So I think that the 8-year console cycle that we saw with the Switch 1, I think that's going to be kind of the upper limit that we're going to see with Nintendo's consoles, if they're going to not be as powerful as its competitors, just because they could make games for the Switch 1 ad infinitum, right? Like Nintendo could keep churning out 3D Zelda games, 3D Mario games on the Switch 1, and people would still eat them all up. But at the same time, they don't want just first-party Nintendo games on their systems. They want third-party games. And the older an already underpowered console at launch gets, the harder that's going to be for those third-party developers to start releasing outside of like the indie games that are decidedly retro in aesthetic and less demanding. But yeah, I think that we're going to see, I would say 6 to 8 is probably a more realistic range than 8 to 10. What's the biggest popular Nintendo game that you just can't get into? It might be the Metroid Prime sequels. It might be Perfect Dark. I've kind of struggled with, even though I'm a massive GoldenEye fan. Perfect Dark has never really done it for me. The joke is always that I have never finished Super Metroid, but I do love Super Metroid. I've just never gotten all the way to the end of it. For the longest time, it was Majora's Mask. I couldn't get into that. I bounced off it so many times, and then I just like basically strapped on a helmet, turned my head down, and ran through the wall until it stuck with me. It was Wind Waker for a while there, but now I love Wind Waker, and I have finished that. For a while, it was also Metroid Prime, but I've since gone back and rectified that as well. Fire Emblem is probably my best answer, to be honest. That's a franchise that has everything going for it that I should love, but it just doesn't click for me the way I feel like it should. And it's not, the strategy elements just are great, but they don't captivate me the way other strategy games like XCOM do. So that's probably my answer, is Fire Emblem. What's the biggest game/game series that you are ashamed to say you still haven't tried? I would say Metal Gear Solid might be up there, but I have played. I mean, I've played about 10 hours of Metal Gear Solid 5, but outside of that, I guess 15 hours if you count Ground Zeroes and Phantom Liberty combined. I've played about 15 hours of that. The Trails. People always tell me I need to play the Trails games, and I'm not really ashamed to say I haven't played them because there's so many of them, and they're all such long RPGs, and I just don't have time for that. So I'm not really ashamed. But yeah, I mean, maybe the Trails franchise. I'm just gonna look up. I'm just typing biggest game franchises here. Okay, so best-selling game franchises: Mario, Tetris, Call of Duty. Played all those. Pokemon, Grand Theft Auto, Minecraft. I mean, I haven't really played too much Minecraft. The Sims, Assassin's Creed, Final Fantasy, Zelda, Sonic, Resident Evil. I haven't played a lot of classic Resident Evil games. Yeah, I mean, I've played most of the big franchises. Dragon Quest is probably a big one for me, where it's like I've just been a very minimal tourist. I've played 3 HD 2D for a short amount of time. I've played, what was it, 8 on 3DS that I played an okay amount. I finally bought Dragon Quest 11 because I've heard such phenomenal things about it, and I want to play that as my next like big RPG. But it's either Dragon Quest or Monster Hunter if I'm gonna narrow it down to biggest game series that I haven't tried. Monster Hunter seems very much up my alley, and I just haven't given it the time. And then the final one from Zach is early 2025 Game of the Year predictions. What Nintendo games might be there? If the next 3D Mario game is as good as something like Odyssey, I think it will be nominated. I don't think it will win. If Ocarina of Time, if they do end up remaking that and it ends up being as big of a reinvention as something like Final Fantasy VII has been, it could be nominated. I don't think it'll win. Honestly, I think this year, if this game does in fact come out, I think it's going to be Grand Theft Auto 6's year to lose. But yeah, I mean, I think that Mario and Zelda have the best chance. Who knows though? Maybe Game Freak has learned its lessons, and Pokemon Legends ZA is going to be fantastic because the first Legends Arceus was amazing and one of my favorite Pokemon games of all time. But I don't think it's Game of the Year quality. It was Nintendo Game of the Year for me, but not. I don't think it was overall Game of the Year. But yeah, I think it's Grand Theft Auto 6. It's really that game's year to lose from where we stand now. But there's a lot we don't know that is coming out in 2025. We don't know a lot about a lot of stuff. Let's see. We're going over to Blue Sky now to get some questions. John Wall on Blue Sky says, will new Mario Paint be a pack-in game to show off the mouse-like functionality of the Joy-Cons? I think it might. Be. That would be a very strong demonstrator of the Joy-Cons. And for people who are old as dirt like me, will remember having Mario Paint on Super Nintendo. I still have the Super Nintendo mouse in my storage unit in my old console tub. I just saw it the other day. Actually, I was unpacking some other stuff, and I came across that mouse. I think it would be smart for Nintendo to include Mario Paint as the pack-in game if they're trying to really highlight the mouse functionality of the Joy-Con 2s or whatever they end up calling them. Because, yeah, I mean, recognizable name, have a Mario's face can be put right on the box, which I don't know how much that impacts it the way it used to. Like, it used to be a big deal that you would go to whatever store and Mario's face would be on it for your Super Nintendo box. Nowadays, I don't know how much that matters, but yeah, can't hurt. Let's see. Hayes Madsen, who's with Inverse, he asked me on Blue Sky, do you think the Switch 2 will have a big gimmick game near launch, like ARMS or 1-2 Switch? I mean, Mario Paint might be it. But I would love another ARMS, honestly. Like, I think that is an underrated game from the Switch 1's catalog. Yeah, I would not mind an ARMS. But Mario Maker, Mario Paint, anything that uses the mouse functionality. Maybe they just have a upgraded version of Civilization 7 that is coming to Switch. Maybe they have a Switch 2 version of that allows you to use the mouse on that game, which is very much designed for keyboard and mouse functionality. Former guest of All Things Nintendo and friend of the show, Klein Felt over on Blue Sky. If the Nintendo Switch Online were to add a DS library, what 5 games would you, Brian Shea, want at launch? Ooh, I should have done some research for this one. Let's look up what games, so I don't just wing it off the top. Number 1 for me would be Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver, one or both of those. So that's 1. New Super Mario Brothers would be a good one. I feel like you've got to put Mario Kart DS. Oh man, do I want to go into just for completion's sake, I almost want to say Zelda Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, but I'm gonna hold off for now. Pokemon Black White easily. And yeah, I guess we'll do Pokemon Platinum maybe. I'm just naming Pokemon games that were on the DS at this point. Black White 2. For variety's sake, let's say Phantom Hourglass. So Pokemon Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Phantom Hourglass, Mario Kart DS, New Super Mario Brothers, and what was my other one? What was my last one? I guess we'll do Pokemon Black and White. Yeah, let's go with those. All right. Kale Michael over on Blue Sky. What do you think the next breakout Nintendo IP will be? I might say it is. I think it might be Metroid. If you think about it, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is going to be a big push for Switch 2. Metroid Dread, it's hard though, because, Metroid has been around for so long and it's never been a giant selling system or game. But Metroid Prime 4 Beyond has an opportunity to kind of bridge to being a mainstream hit if it's very, very good. Outside of that, I love Mario Maker, but I've given that enough love. So what do we want to classify as breakout hits? So we've got Mario, Zelda, Animal Crossing. I guess Animal Crossing was one of their more recent breakout hits. Splatoon was a breakout hit of the Wii U and in the early Switch days. I mean, does Metroid count? Could it be if they do a Rhythm Heaven game, like I suggested on the episode where Marcus Stewart and I pitched what is next for Nintendo's biggest franchises, if they do a Rhythm Heaven game with Nintendo IP, just like Nintendo songs, I think that could be a moderately big hit. I don't know if it'll be a breakout in the sense of it just taking the world by storm the way like Animal Crossing did, unless they had like some really, really cool functionality with it. I mean, yeah, Wii Sports was a breakout there on the Wii. Just trying to think of like other examples and like what the analogs could be. Mario Paint could be a big thing if it does do some cool stuff with that. I could honestly see the Fly Swatter minigame from Mario Paint being a big deal. Like if there's like online co-op for that. But yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. But yeah, I think those are probably the best answers I have. F-Zero could be cool if they find some way to really showcase the power of the Switch 2. All right. David Shinomura on Blue Sky says, will the Switch 2 cartridges taste different than the Switch 1 cartridges? Whew. I don't know why I'm like taking this extremely seriously. It's obviously a funny question, but I think that they might make. I mean, I don't know because they already. I've never actually tasted a Switch cartridge. I know that was a thing for a while. I think that they might keep them the same because I think the whole point of it is that they taste awful, right? They put something on it to make them taste terrible because they don't want people to eat them and they don't want kids to eat them in particular. So I think they're probably going to keep that same thing. So if I had to guess, I mean, Switch 2 cartridges are probably going to taste very similar to Switch 1 cartridges. Let's see. Johnny Root Beer on Blue Sky. What other Nintendo character would you give a DK and Mario Kart 9 style revamp or refresh? Bowser would be a cool one to really just like hammer down on his design, but I feel like they're already kind of like experimenting with his design with Mario Kart 9 or whatever that game ends up being called. I'm looking at my amiibos to see. Yeah, I think Bowser's probably the best pick because unless we're going to go to third-party stuff, I mean, Link just got a design refresh. What about? I mean, Fox has kind of gotten a design refresh in the subsequent years from Star Fox 64. What about like updated visuals for Earthbound? If they do a new Earthbound, I know a lot of the charm of that is the simplistic visuals, but giving us kind of like improved visuals, but like that's not really the characters. So I have a feeling the characters would be different. It wouldn't be like Ness and Lucas, right? So I think I'm gonna say Bowser, even if that's a bit of a boring answer. Let's keep going here. Yeah, just looking at the time there. Andy on Blue Sky says, what might third-party support look like on Switch 2? I think it's going to be big. I think the Switch 2 is going to have massive third-party support, to be honest. I think that a lot of these companies that have been withholding their games from the Switch 1 because it was a monumental task to try to get it so it worked efficiently on the Switch 1 are really going to double down and get as many games as possible on the Switch 2. And I think it's going to be a massive third-party explosion. I would not be surprised if Xbox had multiple first-party games coming over to the Switch. I wouldn't be surprised if we got big games from the past several years like Elden Ring and Metaphor Refantasio, maybe even Final Fantasy VII Remake. I think that the developers are seeing how Street Fighter 6 would be a great fit for that. I think a lot of these developers are seeing the success of the Switch 1 and they're just kind of thinking like, oh man, it sold so many units, has such a huge player base. Imagine if we could put games on that thing. But then it comes down to it's just impossible to put a game with so many visual particle effects like Street Fighter 6 over on the Switch 1, or a massive sprawling game with beautiful visuals like Elden Ring on the Switch 1 without severely compromising how that game runs and looks. That just would be untenable. So I think they're kind of salivating at the idea that there's going to be this more powerful version of this system, and I think we're going to have a substantial launch window lineup, if not launch window, then first year lineup of third party developers coming in with their heavy hitter franchises. Let's see. J. Lucas Carrillo. When are we going to get back to the quirky Nintendo operating system integrations like we had with the 3DS? I want my Switch to have fun customization options, backgrounds, little stickers and tokens, and all kinds of stuff with Mario and company in attendance. I want back my fun Nintendo consoles. Now, I mean, I agree with this sentiment, the vast majority of it. However, I will say that the Switch is still very fun. The customization options are just severely lacking. I will agree with you 100% there, but like the Switch 1 is just an extremely innovative console, but I get what you're saying. I think that Switch 2, it would be a missed opportunity to not give us some level of customization on either the main menu or something beyond just light mode and dark mode. Putting in groups, like I think that that's a mistake. Like just give us themes, give us the eShop song again. Like I want like the Wii Shop channel song to come over to the eShop. I think that would be so much fun. But like let us turn it off if we don't want it. I think the eShop needs a massive revamp for the Switch 2. But yeah, more customization would be awesome. Like I've been running on my PlayStation 5 for a while. I don't know if it's still active because I haven't turned my PS5 on in a while. I have been running the PlayStation 2 style theme for my PS5 because that's such a fun little feature. And I love like the dynamic themes that these consoles have, like Nintendo's biggest competitors. And it's wild that they are the ones of all of them that are not doing that fun customization anymore. Let's go down to KD on Blue Sky. Is there room in the market for two Nintendo products, a la having the DS and the Wii, or is the Switch style of console the end game? This is just like I talked about earlier. I think that it would be a regression to have Nintendo go back to having two systems at the same time and having to support them. I think that for the foreseeable future, having one unified system is the way to go, so that their developers, their stable of developers, can contribute all of their efforts to building out the library for this one system. It is shown for the past 8 years to be the smartest thing that Nintendo has done. And it's something that the Wii U really demonstrated, that, Nintendo can only really meaningfully support one console. And if one of those consoles starts syncing, they are going to abandon ship and focus on the one that isn't syncing. And that's a problem. So I think that having the Switch, or like the Switch style hybrid system, is going to be the way forward for Nintendo, at least for the foreseeable future, unless, having a dedicated handheld system comes back in vogue and becomes something that is very popular, which I know there are people who love dedicated handheld systems. It's not me. I like having the choice of being able to play it up on the TV or being able to play it on the go. But I mean, I bet if they even did a dedicated handheld system, I think that there would be an output that would let you plug it into the TV as well. Um, moving right along here. Gags on Blue Sky. Which franchise would Nintendo use to dip their toes into the free-to-play market on the Nintendo Switch 2? Hmm. So they already have a decent free-to-play stable. I don't think that they want to, though. Like, I don't think they want to do more with the free-to-play market. There's a lot of Pokemon games that are free-to-play. I know that's not technically Nintendo. It's the Pokemon company, just often like published in partnership with Nintendo. I think Animal Crossing was free to play. That was a free to play mobile game for several years. Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. Obviously, Pokemon Trading Card Game Live, Pokemon Go, Pokemon Cafe Mix, Pokemon the Rumble games are free to play largely. But what next? They could potentially do a live service Mario Run style game, but like you're talking specifically on Nintendo Switch. I mean, I could see them, and this is an idea that I had a long time ago when amiibos were kind of at their pinnacle, where they could have amiibos be like almost like the characters. So you have to go buy an amiibo to plug in. So almost like a Super Smash Brothers style game, but not quite Super Smash Brothers. It could be literally any genre, and you just scan your amiibo to get that character. I wouldn't like that, but I could see a world where that exists. But I don't think Nintendo has a ton of interest in having a free to play presence in the way that other developers do. Gags has another few questions here. Which I'm gonna say first party Nintendo release was the most disappointing on Nintendo Switch? They say with how successful Wii Sports was, Switch Sports was a huge letdown to me. Animal Crossing New Horizons was way too huge of a hit to receive as little support as it did, missing plenty of content from previous entries. Yeah, those are good answers. Let's see, what first party game? I mean, Mario Maker 2 was also a disappointment for me in the same sense that Animal Crossing New Horizons was, where it was just a massive game. And Animal Crossing was a massive success. Mario Maker 2 actually undersold, but you could tell they had additional plans for that, and they didn't follow through on those additional plans. Mario Odyssey was disappointing that it never got DLC. I thought we were destined to get like Isle Delfino, maybe like a Mario Galaxy themed kingdom. Having all I mean, we saw what one of those post game levels was, and it just seemed like it would be so smart to just add new kingdoms, which is why I think that they're going to use some of those ideas for whatever the next 3D Mario is. First party Mario or first party Nintendo games. Let me look this up here. I know people were disappointed by Daemon X Machina. I was not the biggest fan. I mean, I was not the biggest fan of the Hyrule Warriors games. I enjoy them, but like that's not my genre. Link's Awakening was a little underwhelming for me. I'm going to say Mario Golf Super Rush, but that's. I mean, if you want to count Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you could say that just because that was such a technical disaster. I was not the biggest fan of Super Mario Party. WarioWare Get It Together was pretty underwhelming for me, and the first 1-2 Switch was a pretty big letdown. I thought that had the chance to kind of give us that like novelty of the Switch, and ultimately it was just a letdown. I think everybody 1-2 Switch. The sequel was actually pretty underappreciated, to be honest, though. Let's see. Does Nintendo abandon the Switch Online mobile app, or do they repurpose it to be more useful to Switch 2? With, example, better screenshot and screen clipping sharing method. I think that it would serve them to expand it out and maybe have it be an app that you can actually download on your Switch 2. But I think that is going to be the way forward. I think it would be foolish of them to keep it mobile only, but I think it would be cool to have it be, hey, you have this on your Switch too, and then you can also access anything you screenshot and record and you can do voice chat if you want on the Switch 2 through that app, or you could do it on your mobile device. I think having it be multi-platform like that would make it a lot more versatile and a lot more useful, because right now getting a screenshot off my Switch can be a pain. So I hope they do that. Let's keep it rolling here with some other people. Oh boy, Michael Kelly on Blue Sky. If you could only choose one of a new 3D Mario or an Ocarina of Time full-on remake to release in 2025, which would you pick? Ooh, does this mean the other one comes out in 2026, or does the other one just cease to exist? Because, oh man, I think I would choose a 3D Mario to come out in 2025, and then we get Ocarina of Time full-on remake in early 2026. But man, do I think we're getting both. If I had to guess, I think the 3D Mario is the slam dunk. The Ocarina of Time remake is just like, there's a lot of rumors to that, and it makes a lot of sense. And like I said, when I interviewed Eiji Aonuma and Hidemaru Fujibayashi, I made a joke about that, and I got a in English response from Eiji Aonuma saying no comment after he laughed. But I would say Mario. I would choose a 3D Mario if I could only choose one to come out this year. But hopefully we get both. Let's keep it rolling with Tortilla over on Instagram. Next Animal Crossing when? I think if I had to guess, I would say that's a 2026 summer or holiday release. It just feels like that's too big of a franchise to leave on the shelf for too long. Animal Crossing New Horizons really put that, if not in the A tier, in like the B+ tier of Nintendo consoles. And I think it would be weird for Nintendo not to capitalize on its popularity. So that's my guess. My official guess is mid to late 2026, because I mean, it would be great if they could get it out in 2025 and really, have their top two sellers from Switch 1 coming to Switch 2 in its first year. But I think they want to space it out a little bit and not get too ahead of their skis, and have it be so that, Mario Kart can have all the sales, 3D Mario, Metroid Prime 4. That's already a very stacked first year for the Switch. Maybe even a Zelda game or a Pokemon game. I mean, the first year of the Switch 2 is looking quite bright. I think Animal Crossing would be a good anchor for a second year for Switch 2. Christiana Barr over on Instagram says, what is your favorite Nintendo moment of all time? Can be yours or a general thing. Oh boy. I mean, it's going to be hard to top the first time seeing Mario come out of the pipe in Super Mario 64, and seeing like this guy that I've played so many games of his in 2D, seeing him in this gorgeous 3D for the first time. This is maybe a black sheep pick, but the finale of Super Mario 3D World is pretty special. The ending of Mario Odyssey is pretty amazing. The finale of Tears of the Kingdom is just mind-blowingly good. Trying to think of other franchises. Splatoon, I've had some really tense matches, and I've, jumped off my couch when the results were shown because they were so exciting. The first time playing Mario Maker was incredible. If you're talking like real life, getting my Super Nintendo, getting my Game Boy Color with Pokemon Blue was just an incredible moment in my life. Getting Donkey Kong Country for SNES for Christmas one year was incredible as well. Yeah, there's a lot of really great ones. I'm sure there's tons that I'm forgetting. Huggable Hipster Gaming on Instagram. Do you think there will be Switch 2 exclusive games? I mean, I'm assuming you mean in the first year. Yeah, I do. I think that we're going to see that this new Mario Kart game is probably going to be Switch 2 exclusive. I think that they're going to not abandon the Switch 1 right away, but rather, do kind of a slow rollout. Like some games will be cross-gen. I think Pokemon Legends ZA is going to be cross-gen. I think Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is going to be cross-gen. I think the new Mario Kart game, I think the new 3D Mario game, I think those are all going to be Switch 2 exclusives. because they've got to have some incentive to have people upgrade, and there's not much incentive if somebody owns Mario Kart and Mario Odyssey, and then they see like those are the two games they care about, and these new games in those series are coming to Switch 1 as well, and they can say, oh yeah, they run much better, they look much better, they play much better on Switch 2. But unless they are actually able to only get them on Switch 2, I think that there's going to be a little bit of hesitancy for a lot of these people to pick up that new console. So yeah, I think that there's going to be a little bit of overlap for these first couple of years, but I think a lot of these games are going to start being Switch 2 exclusives. But they have such a huge player base on the Switch 1, it would be a little misguided, if you ask me, for them to completely abandon that player base in favor of just trying to strong arm people into upgrading. But I don't think it's going to be every Nintendo game from here on out is going to be Switch 2 exclusive, but I think it will start out as 50-50, and then slowly the ratio will skew in favor of the Switch 2 exclusivity as the months and years go on. KCon21 on Instagram. Why does Nintendo get a pass with its practice of remaking and reselling games at full price that are old AF? I mean, it's kind of like because they don't devalue their games, right? Like I've got another question from somebody else that was asking, like, how do they get away with having full price games and not really ever having sales and making their games so expensive? And that's an intentional choice by them, right? Like, they understand that they're leaving some people on the sidelines, but what they're doing is they're not devaluing their game. Like, you think about like some publishers like Ubisoft, they were notorious for throughout like the Xbox 360 generation. They would have a game come out and it'd be $60, and then like a week later it would be on sale for $30, and that would ultimately hinder them in the long run because people would just be, oh, well, I'll just wait for that to go on sale. For Nintendo, you can't really wait for their games to go on sale. And the same is said about their remakes and remasters. And, they get away with it because Nintendo has this rapport with so many gamers, and they are able to showcase that these games don't deteriorate in value. When's the last time you heard of a substantial sale on a Mario, a Zelda, a Pokemon game? Like, there's not a world where we really get substantial sales on the mainline games of those. I mean, we'll get a few sales here and there on like the spin-offs, but ultimately it's you're paying anywhere between, even if it's on sale, it's going to be like $40 for a game that came out at the start of this console generation. I think Breath of the Wild is, very rarely had a sale more than like $10. So yeah, I think that's why they ultimately get away with it, because there is this premium price attributed to Nintendo experiences. That guy Garrick on Instagram. What kind of carrying cases do you gravitate towards with Nintendo products? Do you have a favorite? Yeah, I do have a favorite. I don't have it with me. It's on the other side of this room in a drawer. But yeah, I mean, I like the slimline ones. I don't like ones that take up too much space, and I don't need like the cartridge slots because I don't have any real cartridges for my Switch. They're all on digital, and I have a giant micro SD card in my my Switch, so I don't have to worry about running out of space. Like, I'm never going to run out of space on this thing. I think it's like a terabyte, maybe 1.5 terabytes, something massive like that. And we've talked about in the past how small Nintendo games are relative to its contemporaries. I mean, I don't have a brand for you, but I have really enjoyed having kind of a slimline fabric zipper case, and I take that with me everywhere I go, and it's done a good job of protecting my Switch. But I do put a screen cover over the screen, like a plastic shield. Let's see. Metro Station on Instagram. Why the heck didn't we get Punch Out for Switch, and will we get one for Switch 2? It's actually kind of surprising that we didn't get a Punch Out game, given that you could have the Joy-Cons in each hand and throwing punches, and that would be perfect. I mean, we have fitness boxing games So it would stand to reason that if a Punch-Out game would work really well, and you could do it button controls as well if you want to go that way. Yeah, it seems like a missed opportunity to not have a Punch-Out game, especially with Little Mac. I mean, there's a lot of missed opportunities that Nintendo has, despite how successful it's been, right? Like, we don't have an F-Zero game. We don't have an Earthbound game. We don't have a Punch-Out game. All these characters that have been so beloved in Super Smash Brothers, there's no Wii Fit on Switch. But yeah, Punch-Out would be a great game to have on Switch. And I would love to have one on Switch too. I got a person named Mo Games on Twitter just rattling off a ton of questions. Let me pick 3 and we will answer those because we are coming up on time here. Let's see. Which classic Nintendo character deserves a modern revival? Say F-Zero, right? Like Captain Falcon, it's time. But also Fox. Man, give us a new Star Fox. Figure out what to do with Star Fox. That's all I ask. How do you think Nintendo can improve their online service? I think that further integration with the app, the way that I spelled out in a previous answer, I think that vastly overhauling the eShop, making it so its discoverability is improved, and making the online infrastructure a lot smoother would be great. Some sort of party system. I mean, this is something that Xbox has been doing since Halo 2. That would do a lot. Basically, working with Xbox. We've seen that Xbox has had a willingness to work with Nintendo on a lot of things, mostly bringing games over to Nintendo Switch. But I think that if Nintendo could kind of tap on Xbox to bring Xbox Live over to Switch 2 or some of the Xbox Live features, if nothing else, I think that would go a long way to making the Switch 2's online functionality so much better. Let's choose one more from him because he submitted, I think, like 15 questions. Let's see. What impact do you think Nintendo's partnerships with Microsoft, Ubisoft, etc. will have on future games? I mean, the obvious answer is that some of them might start showing up in Super Smash Brothers. I think that we might start seeing a bit of outsourcing on Nintendo properties, more so than we had before. You know, the way Mario and Rabbids was developed by Ubisoft, the way Hyrule Warriors was developed by Omega Force, the way Cadence of Hyrule was developed by the Crypt of the Necrodancer developer. There's a lot more potential there to have Ubisoft do more stuff. Like a Ubisoft developed Zelda game doesn't sound so far-fetched. The Prince of Persia developer, the Prince of Persia, the Lost Crown developer, they specifically mentioned they would love to remake Zelda 2. I think that's a possibility. It gives them more exclusive content without having to occupy their internal development teams. It ultimately ends up being a win-win. Like, and Ubisoft gets to say they developed a Zelda game, or even just like something like an Assassin's Creed style Zelda game. Obviously, Nintendo wouldn't want it to be as mature rated, but something like that I think would really be something that would help them out a lot. And you could. This is a pie in the sky situation, but having one of Microsoft's internal development teams work on a new Metroid Prime, so that way Retro Studios wasn't tied up for 8 years the way they were with Metroid Prime 4. Something like that could have worked really well. Or bring Nintendo, have Nintendo let Rare do some more development for them, because that would be awesome to have Rare return to working with Nintendo. Okay, we probably have time for 3 more here. Let's choose some more from the Twitter side of things. Dominic Mahoney, former guest of All Things Nintendo and friend of the show. If you could have a dream sequel or remake launch with Switch 2, what would it be? Oh man. Dream sequel or remake. I mean, Ocarina of Time is the obvious answer, but let's say a sequel to Star Fox 64. Like, bring that into the modern era. I would love to see what they could do with a refreshed take on that franchise, because it's too good of a franchise to not have something great going for it. I mean, Star Fox 64 is still one of my favorite games on Nintendo 64, and it's a bummer that they just haven't been able to crack the code. Manuel Perez over on Twitter: how much will Nintendo use the cloud for titles like Halo, Call of Duty, or Flight Simulator? I think I mean, if they bring Flight Simulator, that's an entirely on the cloud game. But I think that it would be a mistake to use too much cloud, rely too heavily on the cloud for the games. I mean, maybe if they want to give you the option to stream it from the cloud or download it, but think about what the Switch 2 and the Switch 1 are so good about, right? Like their main draw is your ability to take it anywhere. I use my Switch 2 when I'm in handheld mode on the plane. You can't stream cloud games in handheld mode. So I think it might be good to, like, supplement it. I think having the option to play games on the cloud is a slam dunk for the Switch 2. I don't think they're going to rely too heavily on cloud streaming, because that really cuts the Switch 2's primary drawing capabilities at the kneecaps. Let's see. I want to do one more here. Okay, well, there's the other one about the pricing. We already kind of covered that. Let's end on this. Eric on Twitter: what will Nintendo's future strategy be regarding maintaining the current Switch ecosystem? Will Switch 2 games be offered on Switch 1? Will Switch 2 games only be available on the new console? One we've touched on a little bit here, but I do think there's going to be kind of a crossfade, right? There's going to be kind of like, at Switch 2 launch, there are going to be certain games that are going to be Switch exclusives, and there are going to be certain games that are Switch 2 and Switch 1 exclusives, or maybe it's just a Switch 1 game that works better on Switch 2. I don't know how it's going to work. I think that as the Switch 2 gets older, that number of Switch 2 exclusives is going to go up, and the Switch 1 games are going to go down. But I do think there are certain heavy hitters that are going to remain on Switch 2 exclusively. The Mario Kart 9s of the world, and 3D Mario, if there's an Ocarina of Time remake. But I think games that have already been announced, like Pokemon Legends ZA, unless Game Freak can't figure out how to optimize it properly for the Switch 1, I think we're going to start seeing that is going to be a cross-gen game. I think Metroid Prime 4 is absolutely going to be a cross-gen game, but it's just going to run so much better on Switch 2. So yeah, I think that wraps up this episode. I think we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you so much to everyone for contributing your questions for this episode. I love doing these so much, and I know that there's a chance that I missed some news as part of this trip. Just I left on Wednesday morning, so I have to pre-record this episode. But thank you to everybody who contributed questions. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. I will save it, and if I do another Q&A, I have a feeling that there's going to be some dry weeks while we wait for the next Switch 2 reveal in early April. So there's a very good likelihood that we will be doing more Q&A episodes in the lead up to that. But for now, thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, my Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in. But you can also get in touch with me at brian@allthingsnintendo.com, or hit me up on Blue Sky or Instagram at Brian P. Shea. That is also my YouTube channel name, and if you would subscribe to that channel, it would help me out a lot. That is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. before we wrap up this episode of All Things Nintendo, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons to the podcast. Abdulla, Adam Scott, Alex Stadnik, Andy Junkins, Ben Richlin, ChapsMyAss, Dan Noorman, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beaman, IanTClark, Jackal, Jason Thompson, Jawarhello, Jill Grodt, Johnny 5, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joshua DeProy, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Mad Genie Confused Koala, Megan S, Pratable, Rob McCann, Bobby Mac 265, Robert Sosa, Russell Sayer, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, Zachary Pliggy, and Zek 3 Swords Sama. Thank you so much for your continued support of the show.
Cybertopia is back, and it's going punk. And after the Corpos threw them under the bus, our former Amazing Corps agents are trying to make sense of it all and find their place in the world once more.
Last thing I remember, the op was going fine, and then everything exploded.
So, it's time to recover.
I mean, hey, so far I've been hungover, beaten up, stole food, had an hour and a half hike, drugged myself half to death, got zapped half back to life. Everything's fine.
Rebuild.
Well, I could dispense eggs again, but the lemonade dispenser is doing steak sauce.
And reconnect with friends, old and new.
Well, look what the trash brought in.
Fortunately though, not everything has been lost.
The tea dispenser still works.
Search for Cybertopia AP anywhere you find your podcasts.